Welcome to Cash Talk, the podcast where we delve into the depths of finance, business, and life itself. I'm your host, John Cachia, a multi-award-winning wealth advisor with a passion for empowering ambitious Australians to confidently achieve financial freedom. Hey everyone, before we get started, this is a quick reminder that everything in this podcast is of a general nature and nothing has been tailored to your personal circumstances. So please seek personal financial advice before acting on this information. And welcome back to Cash Talk. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mark Colletti. Mark, how are you, mate?
Good to see you, John.
Good to see you too, mate. I'm going to jump into a little bit about who you are, Mark, because it's been fascinating to get to know you. Obviously, we've got along as well too. But for the viewers and listeners, Mark is very, very important on this Cash Talk podcast because everything we speak about, really, you can have an impact on. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about Mark. Mark is the founder of Seeking Minds, a psychotherapy practice dedicated in helping individuals overcome mental health challenges. Mark is qualified in, you got to give me what it's called, Gestalt psychotherapy, with years of experience in working with people dealing with trauma, stress, and emotional challenges. He specializes in innovative approaches like Gestalt therapy and EMDR to help people manage their mental well-being, particularly when it comes to financial stress and life's pressures. Mark, welcome again.
Thank you.
What is this Gestalt therapy? Speak to me about that.
Yeah, so Gestalt therapy was probably the initial thing that I was trained in as a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. It is a relational form of psychotherapy. And for those who kind of don't have the distinction between, say, psychotherapy and psychology and psychiatry, I think kind of psychiatry is a little bit more diagnostic, understanding what the diagnosis is. And then often I'll do the treatment, either trauma treatment, or kind of the more practical work that needs to happen on the week in, week out basis.
Okay.
So Gestalt was kind of born from the Second World War, or kind of the outcome of what happened in the Second World War. And it tended to be more of kind of an activist, revolutionary type of therapy, where we started to shift this kind of paradigm of doctor-patient, and it became more about the relationship in the room, and the relationship almost serving as a microcosm to the macrocosm. So whatever is happening here between us in this moment is probably happening outside in your life. And so we kind of serve the purpose of moving through that and building a level of awareness for the patient or the client.
So you're quite engaged with your client.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're working on a lot of habits and a lot of obviously mindset blocks to try and help them to get through on a more active basis.
100%. Yeah, probably the best way that I like to look at it is often, people go to the doctor, they keep saying they have a headache. They go to the doctor gives them Panadol. Yep, headache gets resolved for the moment, but they keep going to the doctor because they keep getting headaches. So that's kind of, even in some psychological forms, or definitely sometimes within psychiatry, the issue is that we're only treating the symptom. I see it as treating the cause. So wanting to move more to a causality. So let's understand why we're getting the headache. And then we could probably treat it, and you don't need Panadol anymore. And that's often where treatment of core organizing themes comes into it. And so that's like the treatment of causality.
Love that, because it really, really resonates with me. Like, for example, you can go see a financial advisor and they can give you a product, which is going to be that script.
Yes.
Yeah. But, what's causing you to get to that particular situation.
Correct.
Yeah. And that takes the ability to kind of work with them and coach them through to break through those invisible ceilings. And we'll speak about a lot of that today, because there is a lot of synergies between that, and also around how you help your patients and how people can kind of bring that into their life, into their wealth, into their businesses, or whatever it is, to really move to the next stage.
Nice.
But before I do, I want to kind of speak about some statistics in Australia that when I was preparing for this podcast, I was not shocked because I'm in it, but I'm still alarmed about where we are in Australia. Nearly 50% of Australians report feeling stressed about their financial situation at the moment. That's huge, 50%. Financial stress is linked to about 25% of suicides in Australia, particularly men facing economic hardship or unemployment. 1 in 5 couples citing money problems as the primary factor to divorce and separation, which we're finding divorce and separation at the highest it's ever been. But on the flip side, individuals are also reporting that 20 to 30% reduction in anxiety and depression symptoms when they feel in control of their financial situation. So regardless of if you think that money is important or whatever, the stats are showing that it is important. Yeah, and it is an area that people need to be mindful of. And I've had a relatively small sample size in regards to Australia, but in my last 2 decades of working with people, why I say I'm not shocked is because I see this. You know, I see this. I've seen someone take his life. I've seen financial stresses. I've seen divorces. I've seen separation over money. We only recently had one where a couple is completely going down 2 different pathways. And when they opened up, their marriage is on the rocks. And we're trying to piece it together, but it's beyond our help. Yeah. So when you're listening to that, what's your thoughts? Yeah.
I guess firstly, those stats, I mean, they're shocking, but they're not surprising because I see this a lot in my practice daily. This thought just came back to me is that, the father of psychotherapy, one of the fathers of psychotherapy says that anxiety is excitement without the support of breath.
Wow.
Right? We could even go a little bit further. And I don't mean clinical anxiety. I think clinical anxiety is something different, but I think that generalized anxiety, go further and say anxiety is excitement without support. And that's both internal and external support. And so what often happens, from what I see in my practice and when I do organizational consulting, is organizations in distress, companies in distress, individuals and couples in distress because they don't have the support system around them. I had a big shock. I think moving from Canada to Australia, I found the way that we did things was a little bit different. My experience of tall poppy syndrome in Australia was probably really salient in terms of how I saw people's experiences. And so that also meant for me, a bit of a lack of support in the environment for people. It's kind of that old Aussie way of kind of doing, you do things and you don't ask for help and you just kind of crash through life.
She'll be right.
She'll be right. And yet, if we flip that anxiety is excitement without support, and we start getting support, we start building on those supports around us, both internal and external. They mean 2 very different things. External would be you guys, right? Something that you guys can offer. But also it's doing the internal work around why do I keep showing up this way in the world? Definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of how people, become okay with seeking their own support, either as a couple or how companies seek support, because companies particularly cause a lot of stress as well for others when they're just trying to survive. Yeah. And so that collective disturbance or parallel process that happens, they may not be aware of it, and they may not be aware of the type of distress that's being caused, but also for themselves and others.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting you said about, obviously, the definition about insanity. And yet, people are wanting that different outcome, but they're not willing to change. Yeah. And so...
Or they don't know how. Yeah. Because sometimes I think the willingness, I'll use purely from a psychological perspective, right? We will only do what we've known to do because in some way it's kept us safe. Right? That's how trauma works, right? We think we go back into the reptilian brain, fight, flight, freeze. These are the 3 kind of things that we have access to. Yep. In some ways, it's kept us alive and it's kept us safe, right? Yet there comes a certain point where it no longer becomes helpful. And so the willingness is kind of, if it takes 400 to 500 times to establish a new kind of neural pathway, right? Say, every time you quit smoking, that 500 times that you say, no, I'm not going to have a cigarette, by the 4th or 500th time, you're now a non-smoker. But so it's about practicing that behavior over and over and over again so that we could replace it with the other one to say, oh, no, this is another way to create safety in the world.
And so these people that are feeling financially stressed and they come to you as a couple and they're feeling stressed and you've had discussions and you can hear that there's some financial stress behind there. What's some practical things that you're maybe guiding them through? Like, what are you doing with these people?
So, firstly, it's around that idea of co-organizing themes, right? This idea that we were not born in a silo. The only way we know of ourselves, truly, is through the interactions that we have with others. We kind of mirror our own behavior based on other people's responses, right? So we need to understand what those co-organizing themes are, right? So the practical advice generally when you have people that are a couple is often they're actually not communicating. So they've set expectations potentially based on fear around why they're feeling the way they're feeling. And fear is, we say fear isn't always helpful, but it is because it tells us what's actually happening, right? Fear is a direct response of feeling out of control, right? You get into a car accident, first thing you're going to experience is fear because you're completely out of control in that moment. Something really significant happens, it's fear, but what that allows you to do is activate parts of yourself that may not be ready to activate if fear didn't come up, right? So we want to understand where those fear responses are.
And when you're talking to a couple,
Yeah.
they've got different potentially previous traumas, if that be from what they've seen with their parents or their grandparents.
100%.
So that communication, then you've got the alignment.
Correct.
And is it then working with them then to say, okay, well, we're here, but your future doesn't need to be there?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and often I call it's the paradoxical theory of change, right? So when we start going into a therapy process, we tend to think that we need to start making change. I disagree with that, actually. The first process is we need to build awareness. Build awareness into what's happening for the individual, but also the couple. Once we start building awareness, change becomes inevitable. But it means that we're not physically exerting a level of energy to make change when it's not honoring our current capacity. So what we need to do is build our current capacity. When we do that, then change is possible because we're not actively doing it. You're surrounded, maybe we change the supports around you. You have now more external supports. You have more internal supports. It then becomes almost unreasonable to keep doing the thing you were doing because now the platform, the foundation has changed. Like if you think of a garden, right? An ecosystem, everything in that ecosystem needs something different. You're not going to treat the whole ecosystem the exact same way. There's this beautiful study that was done in the U.S. where they had Californian redwoods, right? And they took an X-ray of this redwood floor. There was hundreds and thousands of these redwoods, and they were very, very old. And yet what we saw in this particular area where one of the trees had died, it had died of a virus. You've got the other trees around it whose root systems were still feeding energy, information, water to that rooted system. So it still wasn't completely dead. They were just keeping it alive, right? And it's a really beautiful way of thinking about how ecosystems work. When one piece of the ecosystem falls apart, the rest of the ecosystem kind of dives in to try and support it. What that actually does is also take resources away from the other trees. And so if we're thinking of ourselves as ecosystems and the rest, we need to understand what we actually need, right? What do we need to survive, and how are we getting on top of the things, not just to survive, but to live a quality of life that is worth living and equal to each other in a partnership as well.
It's very interesting you talk about the awareness first.
Yes.
Because I constantly tell people around, you have invisible ceilings that are holding you back.
Yeah.
When you're getting into a couple, you've got invisible ceilings on both sides. And for me, it takes an external person usually to go, these are your invisible ceilings. But with that is a level of trust because the person needs to care about you, have your best interests at heart.
Correct.
Because they could be guiding you with you or showing you awarenesses that maybe are not really ready for you now.
Absolutely.
Okay. Because when you talk about trauma and you talk about people's history of where they've come from, I think, and you would probably say this, it's kind of peeling back the onion. Yeah. It's layers and layers and layers and layers. And so it's very interesting you bring that up because it validates with me. And I think the second bit is around then, once you've got that awareness, is then that change. And what I find that most people that are successful in their journey are also very patient. It seems that the corollary between the two is huge.
Yes.
Where there's patience, there's resilience, that when we're talking about the layers, they realize that they're not going to get to the core straight away. They take off one layer, break through that. Take through one layer, break through that. And we're talking about years. And so, offline, we were talking about that. It's interesting that when I look at the data of clients who become successful, they have to break through that 3-year barrier. And when I speak to the advisors, it's that usually the people that want out is we don't either want to change. They might not say it in those words, or we're comfortable where we are. We don't want to grow no more because they've come through that level of trauma, stress. They've got to this and they're scared to go to the next bit because they knew the effort that it took to get from there to there. They don't want to go from there to there.
Spot on. Spot on. There's this in Dante's Inferno. There's this beautiful line in it. It says that we are all, from birth to death, heroes in our own journey. Okay. Right? And if you think of a journey, if you think of more of the type of odysseys that we think about when we think of fantasy, at any point in our life, if we think of the journey, we have to always come up against like a dragon, right? Or a big monster. The metaphor for being an internal trauma that we need to overcome. The moment that we do that, your life can drastically change. And so it's around, again, back to this idea of supports, is having the support in place. So if you think about it as a financial advisor, right? You guys are one of, right? But if you think of the clients who've maybe dropped off, maybe after 2-3 years, maybe they're not receiving that other type of internal support they need, good therapy, good connections, maybe changes in their friendship groups that they've realized have been, historically toxic. So it's that ecosystem. You guys are a part of it, but it can't be all of it.
Correct, Mark.
Right?
And we talk about this, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before around for me personally, I go to the wheel of life exercise where I'm going to all facets of my life.
Yes.
If it be, my love or my wife and my kids and my career and going through all of those. And it's only unless I'm addressing all of them that I feel at my most optimum.
Spot on.
And so do you believe, and is there facts behind this, that if they're not doing that, are they breaking away in other areas?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, you think of adaptation, right? Beautiful kind of way of looking at it. You've got 10 children, 10 babies in an orphanage, right? They're all crying. You have one person that's able to feed them, right? And so that nurse comes in, sees 10 babies. They're all crying. She can only feed as many as she can. Some babies go hungry, okay? Then this one baby realizes, every time I'm crying, I'm not getting my need met, right? So the nurse comes in one day. She sees 9 babies crying, 1 baby smiling, goes over to the baby and says, hey, look at this baby, is smiling, beautiful, walks over to the baby, feeds the baby, right? Now, every time the nurse comes in, the baby starts smiling. Fast forward 3 years, that toddler is getting into an argument with her foster brother, starts smiling, and the parents go, oh, that's kind of cute how he manages relational difficulty, right? 10 years, kind of similar things are happening, right? Gets into a fight in a schoolyard. He's getting bullied, but he laughs and starts laughing it away. Doesn't matter. It's okay because, every time I've smiled, it's been rewarded, right? You're 28 years old. You're in a relationship. You start arguing with your partner, and every time you start arguing, your partner starts smiling and laughing, right? So what was a survival mechanism to keep that person alive and surviving from the very young age of, say, 3 to 5, 6 months old, now became more of a maladaptive coping mechanism, right? And that's where the work needs to change. So the things that did serve us no longer do.
So how do you change that, Mark? Because that's 15, 20 years worth of adaptation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. First, you need to begin to trust the world around you that you can be a different way. So that takes a lot of work.
And it's not going to happen in 12 months usually.
It's not going to. It'll take time.
Yeah.
It'll take time. And look, I'm actually, I'm not a huge proponent for therapy taking forever.
Yes.
Right? Because I believe that we can do short, sharp work that can lead to really big life change, and that's a problem.
And so they're the fixes.
Yes.
And I agree with you. And I say to people, like, even when you come to see financial advice, first stage, like 18 months is fixing, plugging holes.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's around what level you want to go to then.
Correct. Well, if you think about it, right, I've had my own practice for a while now. I still go to therapy weekly, right? So that for me, I know is an absolute support.
Yes.
For me, because it makes me a better person, helps me, understand those points where I haven't always been my best, and nor do I think that I need to be all the time as well. But when we start to actually know that we don't always need to be perfect, that we don't always need to get it right all the time, that sometimes I'm going to have off days as a father, sometimes I'm going to have off days as a husband, but that we could be gentle enough to manage it and then kind of correct it. No, let's not use that paternal word, but, shift it, change it. That's really where we start flowing through life a little bit easier, right? So I think, I don't mean to be kind of shirking your question. How do we fix it? We fix it by building the supports around us that we can begin to trust that the world is a safe place if I start changing the way that I'm doing things.
Okay. And they've got to get to the point where they've become aware that they're willing to change and then change. So I put in that steps because I say people have the greatest motivations to become financially successful and live a fulfilled life, but motivation only gets you so far.
Totally.
So when we go to willingness to change, how can, maybe not verbally, but from actions, how do you know your patients are actually willing to change?
I think when they start taking that step where they start to feel that excitement instead of anxiety.
Okay.
So when they're like, yeah, actually, I tried that. I communicated this thing that I was terrified about with my partner. And I was expecting rejection, but I didn't get it.
Yes.
And that's kind of that first step. Or I'm starting to trust, for example, I'm starting to trust John now with the plan. I've had a lot of reluctance around it, but I feel like I can let that go and I can leave it in their hands and I don't need to worry about it. And I'm going to sit with some of that anxiety and know. And here's the thing. It's the ability to sit with the uncomfortable and yet still trust.
Yes. And trust takes time.
Trust takes time.
You take it away from financial advice. You just take it in regards to my personal trainer. You take it to a psychologist, whatever it's going to be. There's a level of trust.
That's right. Well, look, and I don't go to a plumber to get electrical work done, And so when my wife and I were talking about kind of coming to get some support, everyone was like, oh, why, just do it yourself. And I'm like, but I don't have the time. B, how do I know if I'm making a good decision? And then if we fall off the rocks, it's like that can land directly on me as well. I need to go to an expert for expert advice. Just like if you're having a trauma in your life, you're not going to go to an electrician, right, for that?
So actually, it's an interesting point you raise. Why do people go towards doing it themselves? Yeah. Because the most successful people I've found value themselves and their wheel of life more than anything. And they delegate the rest out because they said exactly what you said. They're the professionals in the field. I'm going to go hire them and I'm going to make more money to afford them. Correct. Do you see that? Because I see that. And sometimes I'm like, do people see the same thing as me? Like, why is a goal to DIY? Like, a goal should not be to DIY. The goal should be to get
outsource. Absolutely. Outsource to qualified good people that you could build a good community with.
So you need to focus on really, like what I've kind of heard even today, which was a little bit of a light bulb to me. In life, you need to focus on getting an epic support group.
Yes, spot on. Spot on. That's what it is. And then with that support group, you can heal those traumas of the past as well.
And break through new things, because that's where the patience and then the resilience to then break through, because you've got the support network to kind of lean back on.
Spot on.
And so where would you say is a first place for someone to look at who maybe feels like they don't have any support? Like they're looking at it and going, you know what, we're in a marriage, we communicate, but not really communicate, number one. So just to paint the picture a little bit. And I can't afford support. What would you say to these people?
It's tricky because I think the first place to start then is with each other.
Yeah.
You need to say, hey, if we're not going to outsource anything, we need to start outsourcing each other.
Yes.
Right? We need to start, we need to rebuild the trust in our relationship, Things like catching up weekly.
Yeah.
On a Friday, having a date night, putting in your goals. This is what we're going to achieve. That's probably the best way to start.
And then focus on having a plan outside of that. So step number one.
Correct.
Focusing on the communication.
That's right.
Where do we want to be together? And I say this, and I don't mean to kind of offend anyone, but like if you're as a couple and you're not having your finances and your plan together, what kind of relationship is that?
That's right.
Yeah, like a relationship is about going from 2 to 1, building a pathway together.
And if you look at, my wife and I's experience, I tend to be very, she's a lot more risk adverse. I take risks. I've always taken risks. Money has always been something a little bit elusive to me. It comes, it goes. I don't really stress. And yet her history has indicated that she's needed to survive that way. My history has indicated that I've needed to survive this way. And so we've had to come to a happy middle, which is, hey, we need to take some of these risks, but I get that we can't be taking the same risks that I'd normally be taking.
But how beautiful is that, Mark? Because I'm similar with my wife. Yeah. We come from different pathways of about how we do things, and I found it actually so beautiful that you're like, at the start, it's a bit of pain and change, and why doesn't she think that way, and why doesn't he think that way? But actually, when you then get to it, you're like, this is actually beautiful.
It's beautiful.
We're doing something together. And it gets onto that like level of fulfillment. And, I love the traditional sense of marriage. I think it's absolutely beautiful that I can grow old with someone. And a big part of that in my eyes is around all of the challenges we've gone through, all of the pathways, all of the things we're doing together and achieving together. And so when you talk about like that couple, they really need to work on that communication. And it's miraculous what happens then with the finances, because then it goes like, all right, Mark, you go off and do that. X, you go off and do that. We'll come together and meet up in a week's time and talk about it over a cup of coffee or a wine or whatever.
Absolutely. And you know how we were just laughing, we were setting the podcast up before, and I was like, yeah, of course, I'm around and the tech stuff is going to go wrong, right? Because I'm just like historically notorious for tech stuff not working. But actually within the partnership, that's what works. Like I tend to be the big ideas guy, like in terms of let's take a risk, let's try this, it's going to be cool. And Kara's amazing at doing the groundwork, and she's amazing at kind of, hey, whoa, come back to me. And let's slow things down a little bit. And that's great. That's what I need, because otherwise I'd be pure chaos. Yeah. Probably makes me good at what I do, just in terms of the intent and the intensity in which I do things. But I need to soften a little bit and come back to reality a little bit. And so that's exactly as you're speaking. That's what's beautiful about that partnership, because we've communicated it, and we're still working through that stuff.
It's amazing to hear this. And obviously it's something that I think about all the time. One thing that I do actually want to talk about is actually around kids, because I constantly get Mark around, these things should be taught at school, these things should be taught at school. However, I think that there's a lot of things that we could be doing at home, and one of them definitely around how our kids are observing our behaviour. And so when I talk to my sons, my two eldest boys, my young one's too young, and I say, like, what do you want to do when you get older? They're like, I want to be the CEO or the owner of Thriving Wealth. That's what they want to do. Yeah. And obviously they're just trying to follow me around like a dirty smell. On the weekend, we went somewhere, and literally it's like I walk down this aisle, they walk down, like, Anyway, so that couple that's not talking, what's the kids observing? And when we talked about what you spoke about with that orphan, with that kid and the adaptation, what's happening there?
That's right. Yeah, and it's a direct correlation. Our children, when they say monkey see, monkey do, that's exactly what's happening. And not only that, there's the nonverbal signals that are happening. There's the connection that they're seeing that they're going to want to represent in the world. And so when you have children that are seeing parents not communicate, not engaged with each other, that becomes normal, right? So if you're not going to do it for your finances, if you're not going to do it for anything else, do it for your kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it's really sad, because if people aren't doing that, they're modeling the wrong behavior.
Yeah.
And financially speaking, Mark, there's going to be an inheritance from the baby boomers to the millennials in Australia of about $4 trillion. And so I'm very much, trying to fix what I'm about to say, but the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's going to get a hell of a lot worse. It's not the financial products that are going to solve that problem. It's the parents and the behaviors that's going to solve that problem. Because when money goes from one hand to another, that child should have been modeled with the right behaviors to accept that money and then use that money. Then, if they're not going to have that money, what do they need to do that? So when we talk about financial struggle and financial stress, I'm with you. If you're not going to do it for yourself, what can you do for your kids? How can you model that right behavior? And I think this is where I really tap my father and my grandfather, especially on the back, is around my grandfather wasn't given that opportunity. He didn't have it. He comes from his dad died when he was 10, comes over to Malta, literally like the Wog Boy story, with nothing in his suitcase and 4 kids under 4 or whatever it was. Yeah. Worked at the docks, kind of did his best he could do. But every day in that car with me that he used to take me to school was he wanted me to be better. Modeling the behavior. I can't do it, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. So when people hear about me being 14 and 9 months going to work for financial planning and work, so even if you can't do it, how can we model that for the kids? Well, I've experienced that. I've experienced that, and honestly, it's not what my grandparents invested in. It's not what my parents invested in, as in financial products. It's what behaviors were they doing? Mark, you to this podcast, you said, I'm going to rock up early. I was already here because on time is not acceptable for me. Where does that behavior come from? My grandfather. church used to start at 9 o'clock. We used to be there at 8:15, cleaning the church before 9 o'clock mass. Like,
And when it just brings this thought up because I do a lot of work with youth as well, you know, and this idea of an assumed privilege is becoming problematic. And I see this a lot, you know, around, you know, I talk about it in other podcasts as well, this idea of what a gentle parent is. Sure, yes, we need to soften. This isn't the generation of the 1960s or 1970s, you know, where it was like, that's and that's it. When you do something wrong, there's explanations, communication around it now. But at the same time, an assumed privilege is problematic. And so, you know, even if I think about my son, when he wants something, right? When he wants something, he's 3 years old. He's already got a piggy bank, right? And, you know, when he wants TV, I'm learning that kind of rights and responsibilities. And this is how I kind of define it and separate it. You know, yes, you have a right, but maybe a child believes they have a right to TV. They have a right to internet, etc. But it's also their responsibility to do what they need to do to gain that right. If you're not responsible about it, you lose it. You lose the right, yeah? And so, for example, when he knows when it's time for TV time, he gets 1 hour a day. He's got to pack up all of his toys. The house has to be schmicko.
yeah, nice.
Right? If he wants to save towards something, he's got money in the piggy bank for that.
Yes.
Yeah? That could be, you know, when he's stealing my money, when he's walking around the house and we put in the piggy bank. But it starts building those links.
Yes.
And that's where starting those links very, very early is the key, and having some sense of self-agency. Right? So if I think about the two main things that I believe as a parent, and these are going to sound maybe a little bit controversial, the two things that I want for my children, one is that I want them to be socially liked. Because what does that mean when a child is socially respected? It means whenever they're out in community, whenever they're out in the world, people are responding to them, wanting to engage with them, being like, hey, come here, talk to me about this, talk to me about that. If the opposite experience is, oh, get them away, they're annoying, they're not okay, they're not well behaved, well, that starts to become their everyday experience. What happens when that happens is they start to lose confidence, they lose their capacity to engage in kind of socially creative ways, and they start to shut down, right? And then they just become the kid who's wanting negative attention.
So the connection.
100%. So, you know, say they go out, they're loved by everyone around them. There's a level of behavior that gets seen, that connects them further, deeper into community. That's number one. Two is not that we're going to parentify them to the point where they're not allowed to make risks. Taking risks for a young person, particularly a teenager, crucial and essential. I am not there to stop them from taking risks. What my wife and I are there for is that when they do take risks and fail, that we're there to hold them. And that we're going to speak to them about the risks that they've taken, how they fell, and how we're going to support them.
It's very interesting, Mark. You obviously come from Canada, and I've found like my experience in the North Americas and Canada was that they very much taught about failure. Yeah, and I remember going to Stanford, and I was blown away that so much teaching around fail, fail, fail. Where here it's not. Succeed. If you fail, we're going to knock you down. And you were talking about tall poppy syndrome before.
Spot on.
And it's very important because I see it even with my boys. Like that's the way they ultimately learn the most. They've taken that risk to kind of break through. And so what I want to do, because Mark, I could talk with you, I think, for hours, is I want to leave people with your sense of how people can kind of break through maybe financial challenges or their invisible ceilings and kind of break through to that next level. Even if, like we said, if it's not for you, it's for your kids. We've talked about being aware. So maybe how do the best practice to become aware? Be honest with themselves about the willingness to change and change. Maybe just a little bit of some tips to leave them with.
Absolutely. So if you think, so there's the unconscious and the conscious, right? Let's start there, and I'll try not to give like a university lecture on this as well.
I get it, yeah.
If everything we experience in the world starts from a place of sensation, right? That is just a feeling, and without giving anything to that feeling, it just remains a feeling, right? So the next step is awareness. What does that awareness tell me about the feeling that I'm experiencing? Let's use hunger as the easiest example in understanding this. So the sensation is the grumble in your stomach, right? Oh, right, I haven't eaten for a while. Awareness. I'm hungry, right? No, so that's telling me that I'm hungry. Mobilization, right? This is the key next step. Mobilization is we're going to move towards the kitchen. Action, we're going to make a sandwich. Contact, we're going to eat the sandwich. Withdrawal, we're going to move away, feel satisfied, right? Where people get lost in this whole process, because we're all traumatized somehow, is we come from the immediate experience of sensation. That sensation becomes intolerable, and then we move straight to action without the awareness, right? So look, the best advice that I could give in this space, do what you need to do to start slowing down in that process before you go to the thing that you most know as an automatic response. Slow it right down, even if it takes 4 to 5 seconds. Stephen Porges, which is an incredible neuroscientist, talks about this. For a highly traumatized child, all we need is another 1 second of stopping and holding before we can actually start changing the neural pathway. And we do this stuff unconsciously. Yeah. So if we can move from that sensation to awareness piece slowly or a little bit more slow before we move to action and contact, that's the key. And how we do that is by building supports around us. Internal and external. So what do I need to do for myself that, what's a plumbing job that I can't plumb? What's a financial job that I can't finance? What's a psychological job that I can't do myself? There's a reason why we're specialists in all of our own fields, right? Because we can't do it all.
Correct.
So if we think back to the ecosystem, what is lacking in my ecosystem that can support me to thrive? Interesting thing that you
like the name.
that you've changed it to thriving well. That's going to allow me to thrive.
Yeah.
And that I don't always need to do it myself. And so that point, we need to move away from this tall poppy syndrome around not celebrating each other's success, but actually bolstering each other, building communities around us that are going to help us.
Yeah, lovely, Mark. My absolute pleasure. I think I could talk to you for hours, mate. So
John.
thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And I'm sure you all have loved that. But if you're loving these podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Check out Seeking Minds. Obviously, if you want to start working with Mark as well too. Absolutely mind blown today. So thank you again.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.